There's dotes and dozy dotes and little lambsy divey, a kiddly divey too, wouldn't you? There's smelly don't know who's divided, divided smelling and the snorty zap.
Welcome back to the Slice of Cherry Guys occasional side series, a little bit lynchy, which really is occasional considering the last one we did was like most of a year ago.
Yeah.
But hey, he's only got so many things.
That's correct.
And we don't want to...
You got to take it slow.
Yeah.
And give it the time it needs to simmer between Little Bit Lynchies.
Yeah, much like that scene in Twin Peaks of the guy brooming the floor of the roadhouse. You've got to... Some things just need a lot of time.
I don't want to end it.
Nope, neither do I.
So let's just keep doing it.
Yep, and that's what we're doing today because we're back with another look at another Lynch property. And actually, coincidentally, it is the one he made after Dune, which was, of course, the first Little Bit Lynchy that we did. And this time, we did that one because Dune Part 2 was coming up. This time, we just did it because it's a Lynch thing. It's a Dune thing. It's a Dune sequel I haven't seen. But it's a Lynch thing that until now, I hadn't seen.
Yeah, that's it.
One of the rare ones of his work that I haven't perused. And that work is, of course, his 1986 neo-noir classic Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet. That was my
That's
rendition.
You trying to be Isabella Rossellini? Yeah.
Yep. That's me. Yeah. Also, the Lana Del Rey version, I listened to that just before.
I should listen to that after this. That
wasn't too bad.
Yeah, hey, I think she could do a great job.
Essentially the exact same thing. But,
but it's still good.
Fine. Yeah.
It's still good.
Yeah.
So I made a promise to you when we started this recording.
Yes.
And that was that I would not, under any circumstances, turn this into an episode where I just go, this is just like Twin Peaks. Because one thing we should make clear right off the bat.
Yes.
This was made in 1986. It's the film he made after Dune. It was a bit of trying to claw back some of his critical loss from that film.
From Dune,
back a bit
correct.
of his goodwill.
And I think it probably a more point towards more classic Lynch directorial activity.
Yeah.
Rather than maybe studio-led projects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's post-Dune and it's pre-Twin Peaks.
Yes.
And yet this film, in many ways, encapsulates almost everything about Twin Peaks and about a lot of his other work too.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of prototype Peaks in this, the same way that a lot of people watched Mulholland Drive and thought there's a lot of Twin Peaks, but that was after.
Post-Peaks.
That was post-Peaks.
Yeah.
This is pre-Peaks.
Yeah. And I think, without taking away from Blue Velvet, it feels like an undercooked Twin Peaks.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing I take away from it, but only when you look at it through that lens.
Yeah.
So when we don't look at it through that lens,
when you
which
just
was the
ignore
purpose,
that show exists.
yeah.
The show that comes 4 years later, you're like, actually, this is a great.
Exactly. Yeah. As a film by itself, it is its own story.
Yes, and I should say, I really enjoyed it.
Yes, I like it.
Even with all the Peaks comparisons, I really liked this movie, and we'll talk about our rating scale for it at the end, but I rate it highly. I think it works as a great neo-noir thriller. It works as a bit of a weird Lynchy thing, but it's also a very accessible Lynch weirdness. Like, there's not a lot you kind of have to squint at and piece together. It's more conventional storytelling.
Correct, and a lot of the symbolism is a little more obvious. I think that's the point, right? As an example, it's like one of the very first scenes, and we were just talking about it because it sort of comes up again at the very end. Is the white picket fence situation, and everything looks beautiful, and then right below the surface is the nastiness and the dirtiness of society.
Yep.
And it's something that Lynch always talks about is how he makes what I consider to be 9 times out of 10 horror films, but it's because of the comparison to the niceness as to and what is gross and bad about society is how that horror comes up. And so this does a great version of that.
100%. And in particular, the horror behind 1950s inspired Americana.
Yeah.
Which he's very, like, David Lynch is a very, gosh, shucks, good old days kind of guy. just in general, let alone in his storytelling, and he frequently aesthetically and thematically calls back to, you know, the courting of young people, the shiny niceness of everyday town life, idyllic small town American life, that then gives way to, as you say, the evil beneath.
Yeah, that's it.
And this film, in many ways, the two films it reminds me of, one of which is Lynch's own Fire Walk With Me, which is the Twin Peaks movie, and which we'll talk about one day, but that's a film that shows one of the main characters, Laura Palmer, and her life in the seedy underbelly of Twin Peaks, where she's already been corrupted into being in the sex trade and being into drug culture and all that.
Yeah.
And there are ways that's inverted in how Blue Velvet works. But the other film that's coming to mind, especially with that 1950s deconstruction, is actually Pleasantville.
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
You know, and that's a film that takes a very different tack. Like, both films are concerned with puncturing the glossy bubble of 1950s America by showing it's actually pretty horrible. And, you know, Pleasantville literally had black and white cinematography that then gave way to color as a way of highlighting the kind of very rigid structures of the town that then became more flexible and more open and more accepting as time went on.
As time went on, yep.
Whereas this film starts in high color, like the first shots of those white picket fences and the flowers growing
the flowers
there,
are
brightly hued, oversaturated color. That then, as the film goes on, like, you then start thinking you're watching a sequel to Eraserhead, where it's dark and gloomy and industrial all over the shop.
I would watch a sequel to Eraserhead any day.
Don't even. We will do Eraserhead one day when I can regather the wits I lost. And actually, sidebar, we're watching. We watched Blue Velvet together just now.
Yes.
And we watched it in early December 2024. And by total coincidence, neither of us remembered this at all. In my Facebook memories this morning, it reminded me that on this day 3 years ago, we saw Eraserhead, and I was watching it for the first time. And
that's it.
Absolutely freaked out by watching that movie.
But like the timing of it, to have done it on the same day, it's crazy.
Exactly. We're going to have to do another one next year on this day. On this specific day, we'll do another one. Like, I don't know, we'll do Inland Empire or something. Another really weird one. But yeah, so this is a film that really, you know, is a deconstruction of the glossy Americana of, you know, nice, clean living, and, you know, there are a lot of virginal, figuratively and most likely literally, unblemished characters who then are drawn into this very seedy underbelly of nastiness. So, for those who haven't seen it, and for this, I think we're going to go full spoilers again because it's
this film is from 1987.
It's nearly 40 years old.
And I would say that most people who want to see a Lynch thing have seen it.
Precisely.
And if you haven't seen it yet, and you want to avoid the spoilers, my suggestion is go watch it.
Go watch it.
It's good to watch. I don't know where you would get it from other than DVD.
We had the Blu-ray.
So but I'm sure that someone has it.
Well, it's one of those films that I think has been printed in the Criterion Classic Collection, so it's probably out there somewhere. Like, I know you can buy it digitally through places like Apple Music and all that.
That's what I was thinking. I don't know. I'm sure there's some digital service has it.
But it's a yet again a reminder for all of us to continue buying physical media anyway. But, you know, I think I've banged that drum a lot. But anyway, so point is, all spoilers from here on in. It's a good movie. Go see it. Yeah. So the story is pretty straightforward in how it starts, with a young man named Jeffrey Beaumont arriving in, I cannot believe Lynch called the place this, in this small American town of Lumberton. And given that it's a town called Lumberton, that's a place that is, of course, a wonderful beach resort that has zero trees anywhere. So, you know,
sure.
No, I'm kidding. It's full of trees.
It's just trees and lumber yards.
It is just essentially, and again, I promise I'm not going to compare it to Twin Peaks the whole way, but it is just Twin Peaks.
It's essentially the same place.
It's not the same shooting location, which was Snoqualmie, Washington State, that they used for Twin Peaks, but it's basically Twin Peaks.
It's basically the same place. It is centered around lumber.
It is centered around lumber.
So much so that the radio station call sign is, you know, something about, and then this is the sound of lumber falling, screw, and then the songs play. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So in this town, Jeffrey arrives, and he's a college student. And my one big criticism of this film, which is not really that big a criticism, is we don't know what kind of student Jeffrey is and why he comes home apart from looking after his dad. So in the start of the film, his dad is watering the plants and collapses. Might be a stroke. Might be just he chose that moment to fall over.
But he's in like full broken neck gear and everything. So
like he's been in a car crash.
Something happened. But I think that to me it's fine because the point isn't that the dad had an accident. It's just the catalyst for him coming home.
It is, but the issue I have is that what happens after he comes home is he starts investigating an ear, a severed ear that he finds in a field. Now, again, I should say this is not a giant criticism. It is not a deal breaker. It is just something that early in the first half hour I was like, is he a criminology student? Is he just investigating it for shits and giggles?
Does he like ears?
Is he doing it because he's a crime writer and he wants inspiration like that show Castle? I don't know.
I think, here's how I see it.
Yeah.
And again, for me, with Lynch, it's always very on the nose. Mm-hmm. I take it that him throwing the rocks, which is what he's doing when he finds the ear, is because he legitimately has nothing in his life. He's extremely bored.
Yeah.
And any small thing of interest is enough to send him so deep down this hole.
Yeah.
That started with an ear and ends with, homicide and all sorts of nightmarish scenarios. So I think that Lynch paints him as a kid who's just bored. Yeah. And I think it's this Hardy Boys sort of the Bookhouse Boys sort of situation where something comes up and it's got to be investigated. You got to take it to the end.
Yep.
There's no point in giving up, and only a coward gives up. Everybody else just investigates until they got to the truth of it.
That's very likely.
That's how I see it.
And unlike Kyle MacLachlan's later iconic character Dale Cooper, who is wily and smart and esoterically thinking on these things, Jeffrey is very bad at investigating. He's just a kid. He's very, very bad at it.
Yeah.
And he ropes in his poor childhood sweetheart friend, played by Laura Dern, who is his unwilling accomplice in tracking down the source of this ear. And in doing so, they come to this apartment, which is the home of a singer played by Isabella Rossellini. Her name is Dorothy. And in some way, Dorothy is connected to this ear. And so Jeffrey comes up with a plan to break into her house by pretending to be a pest inspector.
Yes.
And then going in to find a way to jimmy open her window to come back later. And in doing so, he finds a set of keys. Turns out the keys unlock the front door. And he ends up coming back during the night to try and investigate. And then what ends up happening is he's embroiled in this incredibly weird psychosexual crime thing where it turns out Dorothy is a victim of abuse from this crime lord guy named Frank Booth, played by Dennis Hopper, in probably what is his most scene-chewingly evil turn.
Yeah, he's really nasty.
He's really nasty. He yells and screams and says fuck a lot and does
I don't think
really
you ever hear
horrible...
fuck as many times as you ever hear in this film. He almost beats Limp Bizkit in some of their music.
Yeah, I was wondering if I was watching Deadwood, that's how much he says.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
say that all on there. And he's a thoroughly despicable character who has got her husband and her son in captivity so that she does whatever he wants.
Yeah, he's holding her captive in that sense to do terrible things to her.
Yeah.
I never really took him as a massive crime lord of any sort. No. He's just doing crime, but it seems very small scale.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. He's a terrible person. He's doing terrible things.
He's a terrible person doing terrible things, and it's clearly not a situation that Jeffrey is equipped to handle. Not at all either when he comes to revealing himself to Dorothy. So he spends a scene hiding in her wardrobe, watching Frank do some really horrible, despicable things to her. And when he reveals himself, she initially threatens to kill him, but then they end up engaging in a kind of weird sort of sadomasochistic sexual thing.
In my opinion, it was a reverse role situation for her.
Yeah.
She wanted to feel something different, and because of the abuse she's been suffering, I think that she played her hand incorrectly. That's how I took it.
Yeah, I did see a lot of the abuse she suffered turns into her regaining power by trying to inflict that abuse on
someone else. Yeah.
So for example, Frank beats her during one of their encounters, and then she and you know is in control of it, and then I guess she wants Jeffrey to hit her. But also she's holding him hostage with a knife.
And it's sort of a strange. There's a really weird sort of tension about it, and a very strange relationship that builds there.
Yeah, and it's and it just gets progressively stranger, not only as Jeffrey and Dorothy become closer, but also as more details around what Frank does and around the possible murder of whoever owned the ear and all of that sort of starts to intensify.
Yeah.
And the end result is you have a character who starts the film completely unblemished by the nastiness lurking under the surface of Lumberton, and by the end of the film, Jeffrey makes it out, but he's been affected by his experiences, and he's had to go into the sort of neon underbelly of the town through his experiences
through one
with
night
Frank
of
and Dorothy.
joyrides.
Yeah, through one night of joyrides, you know, and getting the crap beaten out of him.
Yeah.
And all that kind of thing.
And I think what I like about his character arc, I think it plays out quite correctly in that Jeffrey, because he doesn't understand how nasty the world is.
Yeah.
And he actually says it a few times. He's like, why is the world so terrible? Because he can't relate to it, I suppose. But because he doesn't know how nasty the world is, he believes that he's somewhat untouchable and he's going to be able to handle whatever it is, which is why he sticks his nose so deep into this investigation to only end up, you know, post-beating, crying on his bed about the things that he did.
Yeah.
And so for that, I think that his character arc is actually quite correct. He goes in thinking he's indestructible, he becomes destructible, and then realizes that it's not for him. He doesn't understand how to control it. He can't control it, but now he's got to do the right thing.
Yeah, and he ends the film in a very good spot, given that he fixes his relationship with Laura Dern, and he goes back to living a very clean Americana.
Sandy is her name.
Sandy, yeah, but we kept calling her Laura.
Yeah, we said Laura Dern.
We kept saying Laura Dern and all that.
But
yeah, Sandy.
Yeah.
And you know, he's got a relationship with her, and his dad's recovered, and he's sort of living back in the white picket fence backyard of his parents' home. So it is in many ways, like I said, an inverse of Fire Walk with Me, in that Laura Palmer is deep in the nastiness of Twin Peaks and ends the film with her death scene, which is what opens the show. And so she never escapes the horribleness that affected her and that she sort of became part of, whereas Jeffrey does. And as you say, realizes I'm not going to mess with this.
I can't do this.
It's not for me.
Ear or not.
I'd like to live and not be looking for weirdly disguised Dennis Hopper over my shoulder for my life. And comes, so it has a very positive ending. Just to skip to the end. But the journey to get there is fraught, and you're not quite sure if Jeffrey's going to be corrupted entirely and become kind of an edgelord character, or if he's going to die.
There's definitely a few moments where you feel like he's about to die, and there are certainly some moments in there where he does some bad things. But I guess, again, that's just part of the journey of the character, I suppose. So, you know, the things I like to point out when it comes to this film are some of the weird stuff that does happen, but the messaging in this film is way more obvious than other films.
Way more approachable.
Yeah, the parents and the mum particularly, this is Jeffrey's mum I'm talking about.
Yeah.
She is very oblivious to everything that's happening, to the violence that's going on, to the terrible things that happen, particularly to Jeffrey, and the things that he's going around. And granted, he's keeping it secret from her, but she's always shown as watching these kinds of crimes and things like that on TV, which is making it that point out of like, we watch violence on TV, but we won't confront it in real life, or it's too much to confront in real life.
Yeah, it is too much, and it's actually, you've hit on an interesting point there about some of the, for lack of a better term, the good guy characters besides Jeffrey. They're all very intentionally two-dimensional.
Yeah.
Apart from Sandy, to an extent. So Jeffrey's parents, the Detective Williams who investigates things for him, Sandy's mum, they're all very cut and dry, you know. This is
the most
cop,
basic character. Exactly. Cop, mum, dad.
And that's in keeping with this attempt to sort of show the 50s inspired setting as a fairly straightforward, simple time. And even though the story is set in the 80s, the aesthetic and setting involved very strongly evoke the 50s.
Yes.
But those characters are the ones who are very surface level, like good people, but they're very, there's nothing complicated about them. Whereas Dorothy and Frank and Ben, the brothel owner, all of these darker characters have got more layers to them.
Look, I think that the cop, Sandy's dad, does have a little bit, but it also plays into tricking the audience, which I thought is very clever.
So that was what I was going to get to, is they don't really get any of that depth until towards the end. When Jeffrey starts, like... So the way I saw it is, Jeffrey is bored or kind of pushed off by the simplicity of living in Lumberton, but then when he starts to realise it's preferable to living through the hell that is Frank Booth, that's when, like, his mum starts asking him, "Are you okay?"
Yes.
And it's when Detective Williams starts going, "All right, we're going to go." Like, there's a bit where he wrong-foots the audience and you think that he's a crooked cop because his partner is an ally of Frank.
Yes.
And you start thinking he's an ally too, but then it turns out that no, he's just being a really good cop and he's investigating.
He's trying to keep it close to his chest.
Close to the chest. And they do a raid on Frank's headquarters at the end.
Yes.
So as Jeffrey reclaims living the quote-unquote the simple life, it's when the people that he's kind of, I guess, brushed off as kind of simple and whatever and parochial, they then start getting more shading. So just a little bit, but enough that you go, well, actually they are more engaging. So I saw that as a nice little bit of development by Lynch towards the end.
Look, I think the whole film is what I consider to be a very classic Lynch story, in that innocent comes across the darkness of society, faces the darkness of society, and then comes out the other end, right? However they come out the other end, if it's bad or better. But I find that it plays, when I think back on my other Lynch experiences, it just plays so well into all of it that it's the most classic Lynch film I can think of, even though it's more simple.
Yeah, and I think there's nothing wrong with it being simple and accessible, especially given, as we said before, it was the one that came after Dune, which everyone said was an incomprehensible, cut-down mess. And given what he would make after that with stuff like Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway and Inland Empire and Twin Peaks, and especially The Return, when his filmmaking and storytelling starts getting very weird and all of it becomes symbolism and interpretation and semiotics, and it's what you see when you look at the Rorschach blot. This is a very, like, I like that he's got a work that you can just go into and you more or less what you see is what you get, and there are things you can still talk about, but it's basically like a crime film. Like, it's very easy to get into.
It just serves as a really good entry point into watching the rest of Lynch. A lot of the themes that come here in Blue Velvet appear again in a lot of his other work, and I think the comparison that you were making before with Twin Peaks, and it's not just Twin Peaks, it's not just Firewalker, there's so many other things, but the themes are the same, but they're further explored. And it feels like, if I was going to shape up a picture of Lynch's career in that sense, it's his learning how to communicate the message that he's trying to get across in a better way and differently over time. That it changes, but the story, the essence is the same, but the method of delivery is different.
Yeah, I think the way I look at Lynch's filmography is sort of like a cat's eye, where it starts on one narrow end of doing one thing really specifically and closes in a similar place. So far, given what the most recent things he's made, but in the middle there is expansion and room for experimentation. So he starts with Eraserhead, which is a weird ass film. It is just that is all symbolism all the time, and it's all it's the main thing is it's a film about the anxieties of fatherhood and early fatherhood. Yeah. But in terms of the visuals, in terms of the plot, in terms of the themes, in terms of the acting. We watched that movie and had we probably should have started the podcast
at that point, yes.
Because we had I think an hour-long discussion on the phone afterwards, being like, so this meant this, and the woman in the red hair, and all that. Yeah. But it's just a weird film.
Yes.
Good film, weird film. And then towards the end of his career, you've got stuff like What Did Jack Do? The Netflix short film with the monkey, and Twin Peaks: The Return, which... has its accessible moments, but is also a deeply weird show. But then towards the middle, you've got the stuff that kind of is the beginning of tripping over into the fully weird, but also with accessible bits phase, which is where I think Blue Velvet starts that phase.
Yeah, correct.
And it kind of reaches its apex, not with Twin Peaks, but with Mulholland Drive, which is, I think, his best film.
Yeah.
Sorry to spoil our ratings for that, but I think when we do the rankings one day, Mulholland Drive for me is going to sit right at the top.
Yeah.
And that's a film that has a lot to engage with, but it's also, again, an incredibly strange movie.
Yes.
And that's the kind of middle of the cat's eye being this wide area of putting everything into this one piece of artwork, and then the stuff after it kind of goes in one particular direction. It doesn't diminish, but
no.
But by that point, he's found his niche. Yeah. He's found his stride and the thing that really works for him as a creator.
Exactly.
In film and TV. So this for me was really interesting to see as the threshold between the weirdness of pre-Peaks Lynch, the accessibility of Peaks and post-Peaks Lynch, and the thematic and symbolic unpacking that works across both.
Yeah.
So it's like you
didn't have an alliteration for that one though. You needed it.
I was trying to, but I'm like,
no, there's nothing.
It's not the center of the map, but it's a very significant point on that map.
Yeah.
That pulls in, because we really did say a lot of the time, this reminds me of
X.
This scene in Twin Peaks, this scene in Lost Highway,
100%.
This scene in Fire Walk with Me. And to say nothing of the fact that the cast is a Lynch who's who for the most part, between, Kyle is in it, Laura Dern is in it, Dean Stockwell, who was Dr. Yui, is in it.
Nance, the Nancinator.
Jack Nance, who played everything in all of Lynch's films while he was alive, he's in it.
Yes.
Brad Dourif, who was Piter in Dune, is in it. We're probably missing a couple
100%.
somewhere in there. It's also a who's who of the creative talent, so obviously his musical mainstay, the late great Angelo Badalamenti, is there. Julie Cruz shows up on the soundtrack.
For a minute we weren't sure, and then it happened.
and it happened, and we were like, oh, because we had there's this scene where Dorothy's singing, and we both went, that's just basically, where's Julie Cruz?
Yeah, that's it. Sounds like it should be something that would be happening at the Roadhouse. Yeah.
And then later on in the soundtrack, it's Julie Cruz singing. So this film is a Lynch nexus of previous players, but also a bunch who turn up more in his later stuff
that he continues
to use. And we made a joke as well, given how many people specifically are from Dune in this film, that he did this as an apology to have
for something,
sticking them in that as a disaster.
Because then this went on to get some nominations.
It did,
which we were looking at just before as well. But it was obviously a very well received film as well, which is the point.
Yeah, it was an interesting switch from Dune, because he went from big budget blockbuster filmmaking in Dune, which made very little money, to doing this on according to Wikipedia, it was a $6 million US budget, made back 8.6 just in North America. There are no global figures.
Yeah,
on
it's a pretty small release for something like that, but
it's a small release. It's very much got the indie film
Yes.
about it, understandably.
yeah,
And it's a film that relied on its critical reception and its eventual growth into being a cult classic to sustain its lifespan. Because the reception to it, I was reading earlier, really sharply divided critics at the time. A lot of people thought it was exploitative for exploitation's sake, especially when it came to a lot of the explicit sex scenes.
yes,
And some of the things to do with the violence. Others thought it was really artistic and really thematically deep. And there's a whole section on the Wikipedia page just about interpretations of what the
what
lighting,
the difference? Yeah.
you know, the obvious stuff, but then also like the nuances of other elements.
Yeah,
So, you know, and a lot of famous critics weighed in on both ends. So it was not a, we say it's an accessible work, but it's not like he released it and suddenly everyone went, oh, Lynch is forgiven and everything's fine. Because some critics would still go, no, Lynch is done. Lynch is old news.
yeah.
But it did restore his cred. I'm all but certain it played a major role in him getting to do Twin Peaks 4 years later.
100%. And I think
Yeah.
he probably pitched part of this as a refinement of the same ideas.
Yeah.
You know.
So this film is an important entry in his canon and a good way for him to claw back some goodwill because people really, really hated Dune. Even though, as we've established, Dune was an incredible, amazing film and we both love it.
Yeah, but that Spice something edit, what is it?
The Spice Diver edit.
The Spice Diver, that is the best thing.
It is so good.
You watch that.
Yep.
Watch that.
Go watch that.
Yeah.
So no, I was fascinated watching this as a film of seeing how he was at that time in his career, because before then he'd done Dune, Elephant Man, and Eraserhead. I think that was it.
Yeah, I think so. Probably some smaller things as well, but
Yeah. Or had he done Rabbits, or was Rabbits
no,
later?
Rabbits is
was
after
later.
Mulholland Drive.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he'd obviously gone from indie circuit with Eraserhead to critical darling with Elephant Man to bargain basement washed up bin with Dune, and then sort of back into the indie space with Blue Velvet.
There was a lot of short stuff he would have done before then, the Alphabet, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
some of the
a
other
few
stuff,
experimental
yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in terms of his big films,
That's
this
it,
is the one that's there. And as I said, seeing the films that come after the work in Twin Peaks, which this is just the template for a lot of it. It just is.
You know, I know, I
Way,
understand.
the same way you look at Mulholland Drive and you watch it thinking, and because Mulholland Drive was 97, I think, or 99.
99,
yeah. So 9 years after Twin Peaks, 7 years after Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah.
That's a film where the influence is very obvious because it's already happened.
Not to mention Laura Palmer is in it.
In
Mulholland Drive. Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't hurt.
No.
But you've got so much in the small town setting.
Yeah.
You've got it in the, I said before, the kind of the juxtaposition of the nice glossy coat of Americana versus the seedy underbelly. You've got the narrative involving like the apartment that Dorothy lives in is just the red room.
Yeah, basically.
It has a billowing red curtain. It's
just the set design that Lynch does, and there are certain things that you watch of Lynch's and you can tell when he's had a big enough hand in how things look and how they should sound.
Oh my god, the sound.
And how they play out with, and how the actors act in the space.
Yeah.
You can tell when Lynch has done it or when someone else has done it, and that's, I think, a very big part of why Dune, as an example again, doesn't hit the same, because Dune is from a text that has a setting, has a way it has to be, has a look about it, whereas when Lynch sort of, in my opinion, can do the whole thing himself like he does in Blue Velvet, there is a very specific style, sound, look.
Yeah, and it's impossible, if you've seen as much Lynch as we have, to not go, oh, I recognise that, or that sounds like this. Like the sounds in the ambience of Dorothy's apartment and the corridor outside, it just sounds like the Black Lodge.
And out of all things, the reverse train horn sound that he uses, in this, it happens multiple times.
It does.
It's this weird, it's such a signature sound in my head for that.
Yeah, and you even get as early as the scene where Jeffrey's dad collapses and the camera goes down into the grass and sees all the bugs crawling. It sounds just like the electricity sound that is all through when they're making the doubles in the Red Room, and when Mike is using a little bead in
just all over the place. The Lynch hum.
The Lynch hum is definitely front and center. And
you know what though? Speaking of Lynch signature things, not as many Lynch stares in this film.
Not as many stairs.
Yeah, as there usually is. So that probably helps again with the accessibility, because I think people get really uncomfortable when watching an actor just stare at somebody else for a long time. Whereas I feel like I find it quite important in the Lynch films, because it's that moment of you watching somebody show their true character, I suppose. But anyway, that's the way I always saw it. But it doesn't happen in this. I realized, thinking back on it, I don't think there was any stare scenes, where people were just staring and looking around.
No, it felt more, for lack of a better word, organic in terms of how people looked at each other. And in fact, there are several scenes where characters say, "Don't look at me."
Yeah, that's true.
Which is then maybe that's a little subtle hint from Lynch going, okay,
Yeah.
I know I did this in Dune and I did this in my other stuff, but now we're gonna...
Nobody look at each other.
Nobody look at each other. Look like you're talking, because naturally when people talk also, sometimes you do look away to think on things. So,
I think that, one of the scenes, as an example, is when Jeffrey's sitting on his bed, realizing the things that he did, and he was crying. To me, that would have been a classic Lynch stare scene.
Yeah.
Where he could have just sat there staring, but he didn't.
He sees something on the carpet.
Yeah, exactly.
Then we look at the carpet for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Then we look back at Kyle for another 5 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I do like the idiosyncrasy of those stares in things like
It
Twin
works
Peaks.
when it works, yeah.
But I think in this film, like the part of it that must be said is, as weird and strange as it gets at points, the plot is actually fairly propulsive.
Yeah.
It's not an action-packed thrill ride, but it's not a slow burn.
No, it's quite tight in that
quite
sense.
tight.
Yeah, the story is quite tight.
Yeah, and it's a very, scenes breathe as they need to. The editing's really on point. There's no confusion from like things happening too fast, or no boredom from things happening too slow.
No.
I think it's actually probably his best paced movie.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like there's any waste of space, and it's a 2-hour film.
Yeah.
And for 1987, it's pretty unheard of for those long run times for something that would have just been a standard theatrical release.
Yeah, and I mean, we got to the halfway point, which is right after I think he's left Dorothy's apartment for the first time.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize an hour had gone by.
Mm-hmm.
I was riveted, and I've really got to shout out the pacing and the editing by Dwayne Dunham, who also incidentally worked on Twin Peaks.
I was going to say, the alumni is strong.
The alumni is strong. Well, the future alumni is strong. I'm also reading here, Dwayne Dunham was an editor on Return of the Jedi, which is also a great film.
Yeah, there you go.
So there you go. So he did do
Dwayne
other
Dunham.
things. Dwayne Dunham did other things besides
He
Twin Peaks
Dwayne
and
Dunham.
So yeah, really, really love that, and a lot is made as well of the film's cinematography.
Yeah.
So it's done by Frederick Elms, who I don't think... Oh, he did Wild at Heart with Lynch as well.
Yeah, well, this is a very... They're two very similar films. Have you seen Wild at Heart?
Still haven't seen Wild at Heart yet. No.
They're two very similar films in the sense they're both just sort of... Like, while this At Heart is a mystery noir film, but they're both sort of love stories set in a 50s-esque background.
That gives him a good way into do it for this one. I've just seen as well, he also did Eraserhead, so... So,
Yeah.
He's a Lynch player.
Yeah.
But it is shot really well. The lighting and the visuals are spectacular.
Yeah.
Beginning with, again, that first scene with the picket fences and the beautiful flowers, which then cuts to the grimy beetles underneath the earth.
And a lot of really great practical effects for all of this. There's no, obviously,
You know,
not
I
a
love
lot
a
of
practical
CGI,
effect.
right? So he's done it with real bugs. And, the robot bird, as silly as it looked,
at the very end.
At the very end,
fake Robin,
but
yeah.
it's pretty good considering they made it, and it is what it is.
Yeah, and I love a practical effect.
Yeah,
I'm an evangelist of practical effects.
Yeah, that's it. Even the gunshots, they did them with practical effects. There was a lot of really good practical effects through the film. So.
Yeah, no, I've got to shout out the effects department. Not that there needs to be a lot, given it's a crime thriller rather than a sci-fi epic or a strange surreal horror.
To be honest, that's when it becomes more important, because of the few times that it happens, you want it to look as good as it can and have as good a reaction as you can, and I think that plays into that. So
yeah, and it's a film that feels, for all the slightly weird, strange Lynch idiosyncrasies, like for example, when they visit Ben's brothel and they go to leave, saying they're going to go have a night on the town, and then the shot literally after Dennis Hopper yells out what they're going to do. The shot.
You don't want to yell it?
No, I really don't. We're like a PG-rated film or an M-rated film. There's like one use only, and I used it earlier.
Yeah.
I'm not Dennis Hopper. I can't get away with it. But anyway, the shot is they're standing in a room and they yell, and then suddenly the shot blanks them out like they've disappeared, and you see just the background of the room behind them.
Yeah, they literally disappear.
And then a minute later it cuts to them driving on the highway. And it is exactly what would happen for someone going into the Red Room in Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
And it's never explained. It's never highlighted or remarked upon. And the film is not supernatural the way Twin Peaks is. It's all very realistic, grounded.
Yes, yeah.
But it's so despite those little moments, a couple of other little moments that are like that kind of hint at, bit of magical realism that's not really there. It's a still very... the moments that do require the visuals to work like that are done really, really well.
Agreed. And I think one thing we didn't talk about, we spoke about it for a minute, but I didn't want to leave it out of this, is Frank Booth as a character. He's a very good bad guy. He comes off as utterly terrifying and terrible.
He's a complete piece of work.
But there's a really nice display of character that Dennis Hopper does in this, which I think I've only realised now that after watching it this time again now with you, but this constant need to have people play the songs that he wants them to play and sing is this not only a type of control, but the megalomaniac side of him that is, he wants his own soundtrack to life. And he wants to control everybody's vision of him. So he's breathing some kind of drug in. I still maintain it's just oxygen.
Could be oxygen, could be
and
nitrous.
It's not. Yeah, it's not just it's not because he's sick. It's just. I mean, he is sick, but not because he's unhealthy. It's to get high, and he amps himself up with it, so it feels like maybe it's oxygen or something. But like this, he's in this drug-fueled craze for most of the film. I mean, for all of the film that he's in it, basically. But he wants this soundtrack to his life, and he wants other people to play into that soundtrack so that they're part of his story as opposed to anything else.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a very different way of portraying somebody who's looking to control others, if that makes sense.
It does. It adds a little bit of interesting nuance to his villainy. It doesn't make him relatable or likable at all, but it makes it not just him being just a garden variety psycho.
Well, because it doesn't feel like his motivation is he wants money.
No.
It feels... his motivation seems very, very different, and it's about his own experience of life rather than I'm doing this for the money or I'm doing this for whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's a deep... There's a bit of an implication that there's a deep trauma in him that
it's
might
a
have
lot
led
with
to
some
that.
of the mummy talk and the baby talk.
Yeah, a lot of the Oedipal complex stuff.
Yeah.
The film never goes into it, and if it did, it wouldn't make him the least bit relatable.
And I don't really want to know either, to be honest.
No, I don't know.
It's interesting sometimes when learning about a villain's backstory to understand the trauma they went through to get there, but he's just an asshole, and there's nothing I want to understand about him at all.
We don't need the Star Wars prequel trilogy.
That's
Frank
exactly
Booth,
right. Yeah.
at all. But no, he's clearly he's clearly been impacted and wounded by something in his life that has led him in part to do these horrendous things to people. But at the end, he gets shot in the head by Kyle.
Yeah, get him.
And he deserves it.
100%.
He's a horrible, horrible person. So,
Yeah.
But it is interesting because Lynch has this habit, and it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, of having villains who are very just evil for evil's sake. So Bob in Twin Peaks is the literal manifestation.
Maybe that's all
of
that evil is.
Maybe that's all evil is Bob.
Yeah.
Coming out of the explosion of the Trinity test in the 50s. You've got Baron Harkonnen in Dune, who is evil in the book, but is even more cartoonishly villainous in the film.
But this goes along with the thing that we speak about with Lynch all the time, that all of his characters are overblown caricatures of themselves because he likes them to be very obvious.
Well, some of them I think they are, but in this case, as you say, Frank Booth is still a big scenery-chewing Dennis Hopper, but he is a more... There are more layers to him. There's more shading inside the lines.
Yeah.
In a way that I don't think is present for many of the out-and-out villains in his works. Like even the bad guys in Lost Highway, unless you count the protagonist as a villain, given what the things that he does, they're all very cartoonishly evil as well.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, and again, it's interesting seeing it. The things that came after, the things that came before Blue Velvet, the way he renders villainy as having a little bit more of a dimension to it, even if that doesn't mean the villain is a character you feel sorry for. He never makes villains who. The one thing that's universal, I think, for all his villains.
None of them are likable.
None of them are likable.
No.
They're acted well and they're very compelling to watch, but none of them are people that you go, oh,
I feel bad for that
I feel
guy.
bad for you. It's like, no, you're just evil. Like someone like Richard Horn in Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
You're happy to see him get offed.
Yes.
And you're happy when you see Frank Booth get offed.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so I appreciated that there was a little bit more of an attempt, and I don't know if this was Lynch on his own or if there was studio kind of notes that suggested maybe he should make it a bit less of that caricature that he's known for, especially since Dune relied a lot on those caricatures rather than the nuanced complexity of the book. But it worked, and it made things more compelling for me to watch. And same thing for Jeffrey. Like he could have very easily just been a Laura Palmer character who gets turned into nastiness all the way through, or he could be a Donna, who was the other character we kept bringing up a lot. Donna from Twin Peaks.
Look, but again, you mentioned that, but that was, I think, the point we were talking about with him is that comparatively to Twin Peaks, he learns his lesson halfway through and changes. Yes. He doesn't just keep going down and accept the fate and die in the end of in a terrible place. Because he doesn't let it consume him. So he's you just see the lesson being learned here in this film. It, again, doesn't happen very often in a lot of Lynch stuff.
There is an alternative interpretation, which is probably very tinfoil hat.
Sure.
But we are nothing if not lovers of the weird tinfoil hat stuff on this show. So I believe the ending is real and that he did get out and he did, have his whole life.
Sure.
But maybe the ending is because right after he kills Frank, and Detective Williams gets him out, and he and Laura Dern are in the hallway and they kiss, and then the screen goes bright. There's a bright flash of light, and then it cuts to him in the backyard. I believe all that happened, but what if instead there is an interpretation that says Frank shot him? So there's a shot where Frank is in the apartment looking for Jeffrey, and Jeffrey's in the wardrobe, and Frank realizes he might be near there, so he's like shooting the other bodies that are in the house, and he shoots the TV and whatever. And when he shoots the TV, I thought he'd actually shot the wardrobe and either hit Jeffrey or missed him. But you pointed out he shot the TV. But what if he shot the wardrobe?
Yeah.
And actually, this whole time Jeffrey's dead. and he never got out. He couldn't get out of the life, and it killed him. I think the ending, as it's shown, is probably what happened. But I'm also like, well, maybe if you go back and look at that frame again,
what lends itself to that theory is the robins that they show at the end, because she says
flooding with love. Yeah.
Well, that's a dream interpretation of it, right? Rather than being a realistic interpretation. It's Sandy's dream is that robins are just bringing love, and that they represent love in the world or whatever. So,
yeah,
could be.
And given how idyllic the ending is, which is almost unheard of for a David Lynch movie, let alone a noir film.
Yes.
Where, they beat the baddie, he got the girl and had this ridiculously happy life in the backyard where everything is glossy and soft-lensed and very, very wholesome.
Yeah.
And Dorothy's reunited with her son. He's got his little spinny hat back. And all of it is like, could not be... The only thing really missing is her husband is most likely... Or is dead.
We saw him dead
in the house. Her husband is dead.
Yeah. But it sounds like he was probably a bad man. And I only say that because I think my interpretation of the situation... Sorry, just cycling back to it before you finish that thought is that he's the reason that they're involved with Frank.
I did think that.
That's how I interpret the situation. Anyway, sorry.
No, that's what I would think as well. But at the same time, maybe it's not the case and... but anyway.
Yeah.
Otherwise, very idyllic ending.
Yes.
Very happy ending. The music from Angelo is swelling and wholesome, and all that we again get the bright shots of those flowers and the blue sky, and so maybe it was an intentional misdirect that actually the ending is all a dying dream, or it's just a fantasy of what could have been. I don't know, and that's an area where I know I'm very much reading against the grain, because the film does
everything that it can. Do you remember when the thing that represents love, brought the bug?
Yes, I do.
That is the literal representation of things being okay.
Yeah, and everyone
and evil being defeated.
Yeah, everyone commenting like Jeffrey's aunt saying, "Oh, I could never eat a bug." Like, "Oh, it's taking away the evil for us." That's great.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I realize, I fully acknowledge the film,
but it's okay.
Does
Theories
not do anything to say that that's or to imply that's the case, but I also feel that there's enough in it that you could read it that way.
Yeah.
Because that ending is, I like the ending, but it's very saccharine. It's incredibly sweet and wholesome and all that. And for the movie that you've just seen, it is
after everything you've just watched, yes,
a little bit tonally jarring, but not unwelcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's one of the beautiful things about Lynch's films, and again, it comes from seeing the things that come after it, where it is mostly up to symbolism and interpretation. Is you can go back and say, like, we jokingly were mentioning here and there, maybe Frank is a name like Bob. Maybe Frank is a resident of the Black Lodge from Twin Peaks.
The way he acts, feels like he is.
He just acts evil. He acts like Richard Horne, like he's just pure id, pure evil, nastiness. And we say that as a joke because, as far as we know, Lynch's works are all distinct from one another. But at the same time, his work has enough in it that part of what I get a lot of joy out of is about reading too close to it and finding things to pull out of it and read in interesting ways.
I know that you'll hate me for this, but I'm going to bring it up anyway.
Are you bringing up Lost Highway?
No, but Twin Peaks explained.
Just
let me just say one thing from it, okay?
All right.
What the overarching theme
This is the 4 hour
YouTube
the Twin Perfect
yeah.
video. Yeah.
I just to be clear, I really enjoy that video.
Mm-hmm.
But
I do not, if you didn't guess already.
But the reason I'm bringing it up is because he makes a very, very good and valid point in it, which is Lynch films are not there to handhold you through your interpretation. Mm-mm. You are allowed to feel however it is you would like to feel, but at the same time, these films were made by a person who has a vision of a thing that he's trying to portray. Yep. And that vision is very real to him. And I think that vision carries through so much of his work. It doesn't matter when it was made. I think it's the same, very similar story and message that he's been trying to get across.
100%.
And that's, I think, the thing that I get out of it anyway.
No, I fully agree. And I think it comes down in part as well to Lynch's background as a painter.
Yeah.
Because he's really able to bring what good paintings and good artwork can do, which is the ability to convey a sense of what the artist is trying to say, but leaving enough room for you to get your own meaning out of it too, and to not be shackled to the directness of the artist's message. And part of why I love Lynch so much is there are very few directors that really thread that needle. I find generally there are the directors who are completely off in, you know, very indie, experimental, interpretative, symbolic spaces where, you know, everything is just an image, and you know, some of these artists will sort of back away and go, I just put things up there to look deep, and you know, you kind of get
I taped a banana to a wall.
I taped a banana to a wall and then charged, what was it, $9 million for that guy to buy it?
Yeah. And it's a statement on capitalism,
or
whatever. Okay.
And it came with apparently instructions on how to reinstall the banana after it rots.
Perfect.
But the guy ate it, so he doesn't have to do that anymore. But you've got the really artsy auteurs who do that, or you've got directors who range from very straightforward, simple hand-holding to relative hand-holding. Like someone like Christopher Nolan is someone who gives you a narrative that is a clear A to B trajectory, hold your hand through most, but then there are places where, like Inception, is he actually out or not? In
I love that.
In Tenet, like
in my head, sorry, the reason I'm giggling a little bit, the reason why that made me smile is like you picked Nolan out of all of the people, and I can think of two of his films that are the least A to B films I've ever heard
Memento, which is probably
one
of them. 3.
Tenet, Inception, and Memento.
Okay, but the in essence, though,
sure,
thematically,
I appreciate it.
narratively, the films are confusing, but on the whole, there's stuff to interpret, but it's a story where you go, this thing happens with this character at this point. Good films, great films, a lot of films like that I love. Marvel films, I hold you by the hand, A to B.
Yes, of course. I was making a joke.
I know. And look, Tenet has a lot of problems, so maybe that's not a great example, but, you know, a weird film like Memento, which we really should do one day, because that's a great movie. That's a film that, you know, there are things to interpret, and you sort of have to play the film in reverse order because it starts from the end and goes backwards. But on the whole, most of us, I think, come to general agreements of who characters are, what things happen, what the kind of themes are that we're playing with, by and large.
Yes.
I'm trying not to
boil
it down too much and be unkind. I'm not trying to bring this up as a criticism. I'm just saying a lot of these kinds of films, all my favourite films are like that. You know, The Dark Knight and Empire Strikes Back. They're all very much like that kind of thing.
Yes.
But Lynch is able to make a movie that is, in a very crude way, like half of it is plot and half of it is interpretive art. And like we said before, the plot of Blue Velvet is very clear.
Yes.
It's not very ambiguous, and it is essentially an A to B plot. It is young guy goes into a seedy underbelly, finds an ear, goes into a seedy underbelly, comes out the other side and solves crime and kills Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
But all through that, you've got the way the film presents itself visually, orally, musically, thematically. You know, areas of the grey areas of interpretation where we can differ, or we can read against the grain, or we can see it the same way we'd see a painting, and we can see this is the story Lynch is trying to tell, but we can also see here are the bits where we make our own kind of reading of it.
Yeah.
I hope the sense listeners are getting is that I'm not trying to say other directors don't do that. They do, and there are plenty of directors who have backgrounds in other art forms as well, and there are plenty of directors who do the non-artsy interpretive thing, you know, but to do it really well. And again, most of my favorite movies, there's not really a whole lot of ambiguity in them.
No.
You know.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to say one's better than the other, one's, you know, whatever this or the other, but I'm just saying part of what makes Lynch special to me is his ability to have most of his works that aren't Lost Highway, which is a piece of trash.
How dare you!
But actually, even Lost Highway, that's a film that is more artsy than it is plot in many ways.
Yeah.
But even in there, and when we watched it and I hated it, I still said, well, actually, here are some things that kind of got me thinking.
Yeah.
And even at his most pretentious, in things like, Eraserhead is a great film, but it is very pretentious. It's very arty. What Did Jack Do is a very pretentious short film.
Yes.
But there are still things that work balancing that split of narrative and interpretation.
Yeah.
And that's why I love talking about his works with you, and talking about them in general, because I feel like this movie is one I would find new things to talk about if I see it in a year. If we come back on this day, next year, or in 3 years, and we're reminded by Facebook again, I feel like I'll interpret more and draw more out. And if he makes more work subsequently from now that we then see and come back to Blue Velvet after that,
yes,
I feel like there's more to get from it. Does any of that make sense, or am I just
it all makes sense
rambling
to me.
Crazy person?
Yeah. I know it makes 100% sense.
And the ultimate point for that too, for me, is not just that he does that split between art and plot, but that it works.
Yes,
it's a really good balance for me.
Regardless of what my wife says, all of these films work as films, and they're interesting to watch. Yeah. That is the point. Yeah. And for any film, you want it to be something that you want to watch from beginning to end, something I don't want to turn off.
Yep.
Unlike Megalopolis, as an example.
Oh my God.
I'm just name dropping something that I don't want to watch again and didn't want to watch all of. But you know what I'm saying? Like a film that Lynch makes, I've never found myself sitting there being like, I'd love to stop watching this now. I think all of his films cover it, and Blue Velvet is what's the word I'm looking?
It's not an exception.
Exception. I was going to say excuse to the rule, and I'm like, that's not the right word. Somebody help me.
Yeah, and it's important to note, as I keep saying, I hate Lost Highway, but I watched it from cover to cover.
Yeah.
And it's still, like you say, it is a film you watch from beginning to end, and because Lynch you watch from beginning to end. So
yeah.
So don't mistake when we say that to mean all of Lynch's work is perfect because we watch it start to finish.
I say it, but
I don't.
I'm joking.
Some of his work is not good, but it still gets you thinking.
Yes, exactly right.
And that leaves me to think about this film's place in his canon. So we established in the Dune episode a ranking system rather than a score.
Correct, because I can't score. It's very difficult, and I will always watch Lynch films again. So there is...
How many times have you seen Blue Velvet now?
I would say that's probably the 5th time.
Only 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, he has a lot of films, some that I've watched a lot more than others.
What's the record one? Mulholland? Or...
No, Eraserhead, for sure.
How many is Eraserhead?
I don't know. I want to say 15 times.
Wow.
Or something like that. I watched it. I've seen it a lot.
That is probably 13 more times than I'll be willing to see that movie. It's good, but it's a lot.
It's difficult,
Yeah, no, it's hard, for us to rank them that way. And we thought about doing like S, A, B tier. Couldn't do that either. But we've instead opted for arranging the films in our own personal order based on how we feel about them. So Dune obviously stands alone at the moment, but adding Blue Velvet, I'm going to say Blue Velvet goes below Dune for me personally. Really liked Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
Very, very good film. And as we look at more of Lynch's things, it will remain on the higher or the upper tier of the list.
Yes.
But as I said in the Dune ep, I've got too much of a nostalgic attachment to it. I love the book as well as the movie, and I saw it at a young age, so it's kind of, for those reasons, it's a little bit higher. But if we were going to look objectively at it, Blue Velvet is a better film. It's a much better film.
Yeah, correct.
Taking personal feeling out of it, Blue Velvet is a much better constructed movie. So,
yeah.
So for me, it's currently Dune and then Blue Velvet. What about you?
Yeah. Blue Velvet, then Dune. Yeah, I really like Dune, though, which is the thing. Regardless of the problems, I also really enjoy it. But yeah, Blue Velvet, to me, sits separate because it speaks to that I don't know how else to describe it, but that classic Lynch message that I'm always looking at. And through all the years that I've been watching his things, I have always felt. So Blue Velvet's a very classic Lynch film to me. The
classic Lynch film that hadn't yet become a classic when it came out in 1986.
But I definitely saw it out of order.
Yeah.
I didn't watch them in release order of any kind, so it's sort of I watched Blue Velvet after having watched Twin Peaks and other things, so it seems very, formulaic to me, Lynch.
Yeah.
That's all.
And there's nothing wrong with that at
No.
all. It's a bit like Blade Runner in that it kind of codified a genre that hadn't really been made yet.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
There wasn't the classic Lynch film until Blue Velvet, and now everyone looks at it and goes, "Oh yeah, that's the classic."
That
Lynch
is the
film.
classic Lynch
that
film.
made the genre of all the things that came after.
That's it.
Yeah, so they will both, I think, remain in the upper ends of our list as we
Yeah.
do more things, and I don't know what our next one will be. We've had we're thinking. I'm thinking at the moment of how we broach Twin Peaks one day now, because
It's
we're
difficult.
going to have to
I
at some
think
point.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk about that
talk
off the air.
we'll
I
talk
wouldn't
about
need
it
to
off the
record that.
But we might pick something, because we've done now 2 from the 80s, so we might pick his next one from a bit later.
I reckon we do Inland Empire.
Yeah, well, that's another one I haven't seen.
Yeah, that's it. You gotta wipe this off that list.
Because I don't have many listed as that one. Inland Empire, Wild at Heart, Elephant Man, and The Straight Story.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. And then the rest of it... I think and then obviously his little, if we're talking
The
TV,
shorts, yeah.
the
Rabbits.
shorts. But I saw most of Rabbits. Wasn't a fan of
Dumbland.
that. Didn't see Dumbland. I didn't see. Is it On the Air? Is the short
Yeah,
radio one he
yeah.
did? And there was one where he did an episode of a crime anthology in an apartment block. We were reading. The other day.
Room 5 or something like that. I can't remember what it was.
It's from the early 90s or
Yeah.
something. So memorable, no one remembers it. But apart from those little oddities, it's just those 4 movies, and then I'll have seen the bulk of his oeuvre. So yeah, Inland Empire will be our next one. When it will be, we don't know, because we like to keep you
Gotta
guessing.
keep the Little Bit Lynchy episodes a little bit further apart. They're a little bit more intense for me and Chris.
They are, because if you look at the time code, we're now well over an hour.
Yeah.
And there's probably more we could have talked about with this movie, but we'll just be starting to, bore people silly. But in the interest of you not being bored, if you could all kindly navigate to the comments section or your email accounts or your socials and tell us what you thought of Blue Velvet, of Lynch's work in general, of our rankings so far, of how great Kyle MacLachlan is, but how he really needs a haircut in this movie.
How dare you?
He really needs
He's a
haircut.
handsome boy.
He's a handsome boy, no question, but he needs a haircut in this movie. And I get that it's all he's young and he's got the Robert Smith fringe happening.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's meant
yeah.
to be symbolic, and his hair gets rougher the more the song goes on.
Exactly.
But no, I
Whatever.
want to see him as Dale, or I want to see him as hot older gentleman Kyle with the grey
see.
hair. The fringe does not, or even the Paul Atreides mullet from Dune.
Well,
I'll go with that instead.
Sure.
But yeah, tell us what you thought as I said, in the comment section on YouTube, on Spotify, on SoundCloud, or wherever you're finding this podcast to listen to. Or you can email us at our bespoke email address, which is what, co-host Dave?
sliceofcherryguys at gmail.com.
And do you know what I just remembered?
What?
I didn't introduce this again! Oh, I'm so bad at this.
It's fine.
Oh.
It's fine. If you don't know who we are by now, this is a weird place to start.
It is a weird
But
place to start. But
I'm co-host Dave.
I'm co-host Chris, and I have a habit of how many episodes now I've
I
gone.
don't know. Yeah.
Wow, who are we? And I've remembered. Oh,
It's
God.
fine. It's fine.
It's late on a Monday night at the end of the year. I'm tired.
Yeah.
That doesn't excuse all the other times I did it, but I'm just going to say that for this one.
I think that's good.
That's all I've got.
All right.
And that's all that we've got here on Slice of Cherry Guys. So thank you very much for listening to the second episode of A Little Bit Lynchy. Until the next one, you've ordered a slice... I can't remember how we ended the last one. It's a slice of Lynch, and now it's order up.
Yeah,
got
whatever.
a little bit of Lynch?
You've got a little bit of Lynch on you.
You got a little bit of Lynch on you.
And here's a napkin.
Oh. No, that doesn't sound good. That sounds horrible.
It doesn't sound good.
That sounds terrible.
Well, I didn't know what else. That's where I went. It's improv, baby.
You've ordered some Lynch and now it's order up. Bing!
Bing!
Give out little days, naive, out his melon, and the stories and more.